For almost a year, we've been working together to write the first draft of the college's strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. That process has involved hundreds of people across the college, many of whom are with us here today. Throughout the process, you've shared your experiences, your hopes, and your frustrations, and you've made many great suggestions and provided insightful critiques, not only to what we've been doing historically, but also our thoughts about what will happen in the future. So I'm here to thank you. The input that you all provided made the plan better, and frankly, your involvement made it possible for us to be able to complete the first round of our planning process. I appreciate your participation because diversity, equity, and inclusion must be more than a slogan. Now, perhaps more than ever, we need to embrace the proposition that diversity makes us stronger and better, and that access, despite the historic barriers created by inequalities based in race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and other forms of social identity, is an essential part of any meaningful DEI effort. That will require real mechanisms for creating a campus environment where all of our students, faculty, and staff feel welcomed and valued, and where everyone is able to take full advantage of the resources and the opportunities that make LSA the premier public liberal arts institution in the nation. As I mentioned, today is the fourth and final of our community forums, and our topic is the faculty. We're going to focus on the sections of the plan that address that topic. If you're interested in other plan sections, I encourage you to provide feedback through the website or by talking to those of us who have responsibility for various parts of the plan. When you leave here today, we'll have handouts that will give you information about ways in which you can contribute to a planning process. I should note that what we're about to do is take step one of a very long journey, not only refining the plan that we've put on the table at the end of August, but also beginning implementation in many important ways. Today's discussion is going to be led by Associate Dean Liz Cole. Liz was a graduate student here and is a faculty member here, now serving as Associate Dean for Social Sciences. Last academic year, she chaired a faculty task force that looked at our faculty to come up with suggestions not only to improve the diversity of our faculty, but perhaps more importantly, to help improve the climate among our faculty. She's been working tirelessly on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues here at the University of Michigan for a great deal of time, and has been an important part of the leadership group to steward the production of our draft plan. So thank you all for being here this beautiful Friday afternoon, and let me turn things over to Liz to facilitate our discussion.
I want to reiterate Andrew's thanks to you all for making time to be here today. This plan is going to be successful because people in our community commit to both what's in it and to the implementation process, and I know that you're people who are interested and committed. So let me talk about what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by DEI, sort of some background about why this is important to us. And then I will tell you a little bit about some of the other aspects of the plan that have already started to be instituted. Then we'll talk about the faculty portion of the plan. As Andrew kind of implied, this is part of a university-wide planning process during which last year was the planning year, and these plans are set to unfold and be implemented over the next 5 years. So this is just the beginning of a process. And then the most time that we're going to be together today will be spent talking to you, getting your thoughts about the plan. We really want to hear your feedback. What was circulated in August was a draft. We will be posting sort of a summary of that draft to the university-wide website that will go live in early October. And then we plan to submit a revised version for the public to see later in the fall, and these comments that we've been collecting at these sessions will be very important to those revisions. So what are our goals for today? I'm going to share some information about the plan. I hope that some of you had a chance to read the plan, but in case you didn't, I'm going to touch on some highlights. We want to get your feedback about it, and we want to hear how you would like to be involved. And if you have concerns and further ideas, there will be ample time to express them. We have a scribe here who's going to write down the ideas that we hear. So let me start by talking a little about why we think DEI matters. And as we've been talking about in the college, I think there's really two key reasons. And the first is that we see it as part of our responsibility as a public institution to serve people from all backgrounds. We see that as part of the University of Michigan mission, and we see that as going all the way back in our history to President Angel, who talked about envisioning the University of Michigan as a public university that would provide an uncommon education for the common man. That's still our mission today, except we want to provide that uncommon education for the common man, woman, or person who may not care to identify with gender. We think it should be open to everyone. Secondly, we are committed to the idea that diversity is central to excellence and to the pursuit of knowledge, but that better knowledge comes from diverse groups. And some of the important research in this area has been done by our own LSA faculty. Just to single out two, Professor Emeritus Pat Gurin, who's a psychologist, did longitudinal research over years of Michigan students that showed that there were educational benefits for college students in interacting with diverse peers. And some of those benefits included their commitment, their intellectual commitment, and there were also variables about their attitudes towards being engaged citizens that students who were exposed to diverse peers and got to interact in diverse settings benefited from. Another one of our faculty who's done really important research on the centrality of diversity to excellence is Scott Page, who's a faculty member in political science and complex systems. He has shown that diverse groups come up with better solutions even than very brilliant experts, and he's done experiments that show they come up with more creative, effective solutions to problems. And I think that's especially important as we think about how do we maximize all our human capital to solve the kind of social, political, and scientific challenges that we face today and that we're going to face in the future and can't even anticipate now. Bringing everyone to that table is going to generate better solutions. Now, one question that we got a lot and that we thought a lot during the planning process was, what are we talking about when we talk about diversity? And on the committee that I led, and I think this was true in much of the planning that went on in the college, we felt that we intentionally wanted to leave that definition broad and fairly unspecified because there are so many dimensions of human diversity that matter. So importantly, we thought about race and ethnicity and gender identity. We thought about sexual orientation and socioeconomic status, and I would claim those are probably the aspects of diversity that get talked about the most. But we also talked about language, we talked about culture and national origin, we talked about religious commitments, we talked about age, disability, and political perspective, and we tried to design interventions that we thought were going to create a campus where people who are diverse in all those different ways are better poised to have access to all that's offered here at Michigan. We're interested in creating a climate where everyone can succeed and thrive here. But we also recognized that creating a diverse university that really offers opportunity to everyone doesn't just happen. It's not even enough just to bring diverse people together on campus. Because patterns of past discrimination, because of ongoing structural inequalities, and the barriers that they present to success, it means that even when you have equality of access, you can't always expect that everyone has the same access to success or the same outcomes. So one way to depict this graphically is this great little cartoon that Associate Dean Angela Dillard found that tries to express in a very small amount of space what we mean when we talk about equity. So because different individuals come to campus with different skills, backgrounds, talents, they might not all need the same things to be successful. So you see in the left side of the panel where everyone's given the same resources, not everyone has the same ability to see what's going on. And I originally thought this was the view from Michigan Stadium, but once we saw it blown up, I realized, oh, it's a baseball game. I thought it was a very good Michigan picture, but not so much. In contrast, what equity means is that people can have access to all different kinds of resources and supports based on the different talents and strengths and also needs that they bring so that everyone has a route to success, right? So in the second picture, people are getting different kinds of assistants to all have the same outcome of being able to see the game. So this picture is meant to express the difference between equality and equity. And what I think is also sort of implicit in it is that in order to have equity, we have to make deliberate efforts. We have to understand those needs, identify them, and then make provisions so that all the members of our community can be successful. Okay, so our vision is that we're going to put in this deliberate effort to ensure that our campus is a place where differences are welcomed, different perspectives are heard respectfully, and every individual feels a sense of belonging and inclusion. And inclusion brings us to the third piece of DEI. And this is sort of a helpful little analogy that is often used by Rob Seller's office. You can think of diversity and equity and inclusion being similar to what would you do if you were planning a party, right? So diversity means that everyone gets to come to the party. You could think about diversity being about access. Equity is that everyone gets to both contribute and take advantage of resources, right? So everyone gets to contribute to the playlist. And inclusion is that there's full participation. So the example I gave in the analogy, it's that everyone gets to dance. One thing that we've talked about a lot at the college that I think really gets at this inclusion idea is that there's a lot of fascinating opportunities for students on campus that are very enriching, great opportunities to learn and grow, like study abroad, say, or taking an unpaid internship. If a student doesn't have the financial resources to take advantage of that, we can't really say we have an inclusive campus, right? Not everyone's having equal access to that experience. Okay, so with those thoughts in mind, let's talk a little about how we went into the planning process. As Andrew mentioned, I chaired a task force to think about what we could do to increase diversity of the faculty and improve climate and improve retention for faculty. I led a task force that had 3 members from each division of LSA, natural science, social science, and humanities. And what we did was we began by spending a lot of time educating ourselves about what was and wasn't possible under Prop 2. We spent a lot of time going over data about how we'd been doing in the past and kind of trends in the recruitment of faculty. We looked at climate data from Advance, so how are faculty on campus experiencing the climate? Then we met with the chairs and directors of all the units, and then finally we held open faculty meetings in January that were organized by different identity groups that were open to anyone, but we discussed the issues of different groups. So we had meetings devoted to different ethnic and racial groups. We had a meeting around social class. We had a meeting on disability. We had one on sexual orientation. We had a meeting that didn't have a topic at all. So through those meetings, we were able to talk face-to-face with a lot of our faculty to hear their ideas, and you can see some of those themes reflected in our plan. We think it's really important to also acknowledge in the planning process the fundamental kind of motivation and impetus that we received from the students who participated in the movement Being Black at U of M, which you might recall took place in 2013. We found that students were tweeting really cogent, poignant narratives of their experiences that made really vivid at a national level what was at stake, where we were falling short, and what it was like in a really kind of lived experience way. And those tweets, many administrators and faculty felt like we knew there was a problem, maybe we didn't know that the problem was of this magnitude, we must act now. Many of us see the students who participated in this movement as maybe the originators of this planning process. And that's why we went so far as to quote some of their words in our plan. The other thing I'll say about the planning process is that even though you can go through our plan and see that it's separated into different sections based on faculty, staff, students, we envision all the parts of the plan working together in a synergistic way to amplify each other. So when our faculty are more diverse and we have more faculty here who are skilled at building diverse communities or doing work on topics related to diversity, we believe that will benefit students. When we improve the training and climate for diverse staff, we think that that will enhance the ability of faculty and staff to collaborate together on these efforts. It'll enhance our ability to provide services to students. So these are in some ways kind of separate plans, but they're designed to work together. I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the parts of the plan we're not going to focus on today, and then I will give you some highlights of our faculty plan. So even though last year was the planning year, we were able to initiate some of our initiatives, and we have already had some progress and some successes. And one of the things that we're most excited about and has already been really fruitful is that we created a new position called the Staff DEI Officer, and we hired a very excellent and experienced person, Letitia Cunningham, to fill that role, and she's already at work on helping us implement the plan. Another piece of the plan that's already on the road is that we have a laptop loan program for LSA students from the lowest socioeconomic families. And this was an attempt to address the digital divide for our LSA students, to help recruit students from less affluent families to LSA and then retain them here through graduation. That process was piloted last year, and we hope to expand it. And then finally last year, Angela Dillard's division did a comprehensive review of the race and ethnicity requirement. And although their overall finding was the program was sound, they also came up with a lot of creative, innovative ways to improve that program, like have more courses that have to do with global R&E, or create more R&E courses that involve community work. And so we think the outcome from that process will be to create a stronger and more vibrant R&E requirement. Okay, so let me move to tell you a little bit about what we came up with as goals for the faculty part of the plan. You know, we went into this plan, I think, expecting that the biggest piece of it was going to be recruitment. But in our early conversations, we really quickly came to a consensus that making a big press to recruitment could not be effective if it didn't go hand in hand with efforts to improve climate, because climate is so intimately tied to retention, and there's no point bringing more people to campus only to have them leave. So we really quickly narrowed into, we have to have a plan that has 3 areas, and of course one part of that is commitment, but we also have to work on climate and retention, and we also have to work on career advising. We want people here to be mentored and be very successful, and that's another key part to keeping the people we recruit here to stay. As I said, I'm just going to talk about some highlights. I welcome you to read the whole plan that has more specific goals that are matched to each of these 3 pillars. So the first one's to improve climate and retention. Let me talk a little bit about some of the evidence that made us think this was so fundamental. Our advance office, the University Advance Office, had done surveys of faculty across campus looking at their experiences of whether they felt bias and exclusion in their departments, and how much they felt that they had influence and voice. And they had a lot of data gathered over many years about this. And what they found was, you know, sad but not surprising, that female faculty reported more experiences of bias and exclusion than male faculty did. And female faculty felt that they had less influence and voice than the male faculty. There's a similar pattern with faculty from underrepresented minority groups. They reported more bias and exclusion and felt that they had less influence and voice, and this is at the department level, compared to faculty who were not from underrepresented groups. What made this really important was that feeling bias and exclusion and feeling that you don't have influence in your department were both correlated with having thought about leaving Michigan. So this was one of the data points that made us think we have to be working seriously on climate. Another thing we thought was really important is climate's really in our own hands, right? Like, we talked a lot about what are the legal issues that govern recruitment. There's some limits on that, but we can do, you know, any good initiative we can think of where it's within our control to try to work towards the improvement of climate in our units. And so based on those insights, we came up with a few strategic goals, and I'll tell you about several of them. First, we heard from a lot of faculty at our open faculty meetings that people who had been doing this work around diversity felt that it was an added extra layer of work that often was really taxing, often was a lot of hours, and was largely unrecognized by the college or their departments. So one recommendation that the task force came up with is to revise the criteria for faculty evaluation to include significant contributions to DEI in research, teaching, and service. And we talked about how this could be done through annual merit reviews, through promotions, and even be made criteria for awards like collegiate professors. And what we wanted to do was to look at a way, not that this work was necessarily going to be expected of everyone, but that the people who had made significant contributions in this area, that work could be recognized and rewarded. And part of instituting that is going to mean that we need to develop criteria to evaluate that work, to decide when is DEI work high quality work. But other schools have done this, and we believe we can learn from them, and that that's something that we can eventually incorporate over the course of this plan. And actually, in the guidelines for this year's merit review process for faculty, DEI work was listed as a type of work that could be recognized with raises from the C Fund. So every year there's certain kinds of merit that are recognized by this part of the faculty raise pool. This year DEI work was one of those kinds of work. So we've already started incorporating this as a criteria for evaluation. The second thing that we recommend is that departments should create committees and service assignments for DEI work so that it can be something that counts towards a faculty member's overall service load, right? If you're serving on the diversity committee, then it would not be appropriate to also ask you to serve on graduate admissions, right? But the system that has sort of evolved in many cases is that DEI work is taken up kind of over and above your other service assignments, and you do it on a volunteer basis, and so it's not really counting towards your overall work plan. And then finally, we talked about how retention offers are made when people have outside offers, and it appeared that there was very uneven information about this, and there was belief that some people were getting retention offers and that other people were not. And so we talked about the importance of tracking and evaluating the process through which retention offers are made so that we can notice if inequity is going on there and try to address that aspect of the faculty life cycle. So as I said, there's some other ideas that we've come up with to improve climate, but those are three that I wanted to highlight here. The second thing we talked about was improving mentoring. And this is one of my favorite parts of the plan because I think of this as not being geared to any specific aspect of diversity, but the idea is that when we do effective mentoring, when we monitor mentoring and make sure that, assess it, make sure that it's having the impact we want it to have, not only does it help everyone be successful here, it stands to benefit the faculty members who are from less traditionally represented groups the most, right? So it's an idea that providing support for everyone can be successful. One of the ways that we plan to do this is to offer launch committees to all faculty. Now, if you're in the natural sciences, you might already know what a launch committee is. This is a mentoring program that's been going on in other schools besides LSA and in our natural sciences for a while. Incoming tenure track faculty members are assigned a committee that's made up of their department chair, a mentor from within their department, a mentor from outside their department, because we've heard that often faculty feel like maybe there's certain things I want to ask, but I need to ask it of someone in a more confidential setting. And then the fourth person is called a convener, and it's someone who's trained to run the committee. And the committee is meets with the junior faculty member every month, and there's a scripted set of issues to go over every month that were well designed based on what's going on as a faculty member transitions to their first job over the course of that year. So we've been doing this for a while in the natural sciences. This year we're going to pilot that program in 2 social science departments and 2 humanities departments because we recognize that the natural science model isn't going to seamlessly fit on those other 2 areas. Once we get that sort of fine-tuned, we're planning to roll that out across the divisions. The second thing we want to do around mentoring is that in LSA, every department is required to have a mentoring plan, but we, as a college, haven't really looked at what's in those plans, and we've never done anything to see is what's in the plan actually being carried out. So we are going to start looking at those plans, meeting with departments, talking with them about how's this working, are there ways it could be better, can we improve this to better position your faculty for tenure and promotion. And that's something we're going to have to roll out over several years, but it's another way that we're trying to make sure that the faculty we hire are actually successfully retained until tenure and promotion. And that brings me to recruitment, which is probably the biggest part of our plan, but that, as I said, relies very importantly on the other 2 pillars. We are about to roll out what we're calling the LSA Collegiate Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. And today I can give you just a little bit of information about it because it's going to be formally launched on October 6th when President Schlissel talks about it in the context of the university-wide diversity plan. We plan to recruit our first cohort this year, And ultimately, our plan is to recruit 50 postdoctoral fellows to LSA over the next 5 years, so on average 10 a year. We have reserved the resources in order to convert all of those lines into tenure-track faculty. So the idea is that this postdoctoral program will have a non-incremental impact on the representation of faculty on campus who have the skills, the background, and the commitment to enhance our diversity mission on campus. So that could be people whose scholarship has to do with diversity. That could be people who have demonstrated their commitment to mentoring and teaching in this area. So we're looking for people who bring the skills, and I'll say a little bit more about how we're recognizing that this is a skill set, who bring the skills to enhance the diversity of our university. In some ways, this is an expansion, or it's inspired by, I'll say, the President's Postdoctoral Fellowship, but that is a small-scale program that's generally restricted to faculty in the natural sciences. Ours will be a larger scale, and it will be open to faculty from all LSA divisions. Another way ours is different is that the postdocs will be here for 2 years, and they'll teach one course each year. So that will help prepare them for their teaching careers, and it'll also be an opportunity for our undergraduate students to benefit from interacting with these exciting young scholars. We're also setting up clear mechanisms for mentoring, and it's our vision that this will be a cohort that offers each other mutual support, and that is part of the non-incremental change that we hope to see. Another thing that we've proposed in our plan is that departments will be asked to create diversity hiring plans. In these plans, we'll ask departments to reflect on what they've been doing and whether it's been successful. The reason we're doing it at the department level is because we think each of these plans needs to address the conditions that are particular to that discipline. And what our goal is for all departments to make progress over time. And again, what we're looking for is how do you plan to add faculty to your unit who have the expertise, who have the demonstrated commitment to further our diversity mission. Once these plans are in place, we will expect that each year when departments request authorization to search, they'll need to explain how the position fits into the plan. And so that means they'll need to position this position in light of their larger long-term plan for adding expertise on diversity to their departments. Now, as we've developed this plan, we've realized that what we're proposing is a tremendous amount of work, and it's also work that not just anyone can do. There's expertise in this area. There's networking that people need to have. And so what we've also proposed in our plan is to consider the possibility of creating a new position for the Associate Dean for DEI. And we envision that this position would not only have a portfolio that included diversity efforts, but that they would also oversee efforts for faculty professional development. Because as you can see, we think that this mentoring piece is really key to our long-term DEI success. This person would coordinate and communicate with departments and with other units on campus. Right now we're in the process of thinking about what would that portfolio look like. Are there similar positions at our peer institutions, and kind of weighing whether this is a step that we want to go forward with, but our plan puts this on the table as a way both to recognize and compensate the significant work that's going to be necessary to make our plan successful, and also to bring someone onto our administrative team who's got significant knowledge and commitment in this area. And then I'll tell you about one more thing, and then we can go into the dialogue. So the last thing I want to talk about emerged from my faculty task force, but is not necessarily directly related to faculty diversity. This was something that came out of the many events that we attended in the fall, where we often heard faculty and graduate students talk about their experience of the history of the struggle for diversity on this campus. So many long-term faculty and even some staff talked about being here during periods of other social movements, people who are here for BAM 1 and BAM 2, people who remember diversity blueprints, right? And sometimes these stories were expressed with a lot of exhaustion and sometimes despair, and sometimes it was sort of coupled with this feeling like, here we go again. And so my committee talked a lot about, we're hearing this, we can feel it's important, what can we do with this? And I think also part of the frustration was feeling like, I've been here long enough to see this, and now we're just sort of reliving the past. And so an idea that was proposed by a historian on our committee was, what if we kind of commissioned a bunch of community projects that would depict this history in ways that make it more visible. So it could have to do with the kinds of pictures and portraits that we have in the hallways of our buildings. It could have to do with performance pieces. It could take all kinds of different forms, but the idea is projects that would be interdisciplinary, that would often involve the humanities and would make this past visible, make it sort of legibly written on the body of the campus. So we are going to set aside some funding for faculty, and ideally faculty, to collaborate with students on projects that kind of demonstrate this history in a way that brings it to life and makes it visible for people on campus today.